So Rob, tell us about you, what you do at Qualcomm.
At Qualcomm, I have a couple different roles. I run a division that provides solutions to operators that we've done traditionally things like the original application store that Qualcomm did back in 2001 for our operating system called Brew, and then push-to-talk technology called QChat. But I also really broadly think about software and its relationship to mobile. So while we're mostly known for being a hardware and a radio company, we actually do have thousands of software engineers. We try to think about how we build software and our relationship to the rest of the internet and other players in the software ecosystem.
Interesting. And tell me about your diplomas. What did you do to get there at Qualcomm?
What did I do to get there? My degree is actually electrical engineering and applied mathematics, which, given how old I am, that was called computer science back at the time. So I went to Carnegie Mellon University, and they didn't offer an undergraduate in computer science at the time, so that's what I did. So all my electives were computer science.
All right, so basically nerds and geeks.
Yeah, nerds and geeks, only I did it in software more than in hardware. When I started school, I thought I was going to do hardware, but then they wanted me to spend my semester learning about the physics of the PN junction, and I decided I'd rather build software instead.
All right. So we have a lot of young readers who actually are in school right now, and they would be interested in knowing how to achieve their goal in assuming your position, for instance. What would you tell them for that?
So now I have to worry about your readers for my job. I think the best advice, the thing that I always think about, and what I told my own children too, what you want to learn in school is how to think, not how to be an expert in something that is the current thing of that day, right? So I always object when you think about computer science, for example, you have to think about how to understand the problem and decompose it. No different than any other design skill, whether you're an artist, whether you're an engineer, whether you're an architect. But what you want to have is the fundamental tools for understanding it. So you want to understand, why are things complex? How do I solve things in different ways that make them less complex or easier to scale? How do I put things together into big systems? Because if you really look at the large, successful commercial things, like things that make people money, they're made up of many, many parts in a very complex system. You can't build a small thing now and have it beat what's in the world, because the things that are in the world are very complicated. Mm-hmm. So it's thinking that's important.
So let's talk about 4G LTE in France. Right now, phone carriers are really reluctant to deploy all their assets on the 4G networks. For instance, they don't want to basically switch their 2G networks into 4G, so people can actually benefit from that. What can Qualcomm do to actually make them make that move?
I think one of the things that we're doing that will probably have impact is we're trying to push LTE down in the tiers of the phone. So it's not just a feature of the highest end phone that's there, but LTE is actually something that's on everything. And to do that, I think it's really important to understand that's not just making LTE by itself work well. That means LTE has to work in this multi-mode fashion, because until some years from now, LTE isn't going to be everywhere, so we'll always be falling back. Same thing happened in the 3G transition. I mean, GSM hasn't gone away, right? Because it still is something that is in almost everywhere in the world. So the phones and the modems that we build are multi-mode. I think that's going to help drive it. That's one of the attacks that we're taking on that problem.
All right. So let's talk about battery life now. We've seen some tremendous increase in the performance of the Snapdragon S3, S4, and other several competitors' chips. Still, in the mobile industry, we can't achieve the same battery life as we had on feature phones back then, like a week battery lifespan, for instance. How can Qualcomm manage that for the years to come?
Yeah, I mean, the trade-off that we've been making, and I think it's actually driven by what consumers have been demanding, is we want increased performance with a acceptable battery life, or a good battery life, but the trade-off has never been from the consumer, I want to go back to what I was doing when I had that week of battery life and afford that. Because there's I don't know whether you attribute this to Robert Heinlein, the author, or whatever, but there's that saying, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch, right? When I say, you just asked me about LTE, if you want to have LTE speeds, that takes energy, right? So if you want to be able to watch that video on your phone and be looking at browsing the internet at the speeds that you want, it's going to cost you more energy than what it was to get text messages and one voice call a day and have a weak battery life. So I don't view it as so much a challenge of have we not increased the sort of energy profile. We've actually made the devices much more efficient than they were when we were getting those battery life. But at the same time, consumers' expectations have gone up so dramatically that actually keeping pace with having a day or two of battery life or 3 days of standby has actually been very difficult, and we've been very successful, I think, in meeting that demand. So it depends on what you think success is. It can't be, you can't measure the energy without having, what most people think of as a model for days of use model or a typical use model.
So consumers see this as a trade-off, and you see this as an increase in performance per watt, as I was saying in Berlin, right?
Right, exactly, and I think we've actually done quite well with the performance per watt. Yeah.
Indeed. We have an issue about our consumers who regard smartphones versus their cores. They are saying that quad cores are far better than dual cores, obviously, because the numbers speak for themselves. And Qualcomm, besides Nokia, have been saying that this is wrong, actually, because some of the chips, some of the dual core chips, actually perform better than some of quad cores of competitors. How can you educate the consumers so they can rethink the way that they see smartphone specifications?
Actually, we were hoping you would educate the consumers about this. I mean, it's funny. You start that argument, and then if you take that out to one direction, you say, well, why don't we have laptops that have 32 cores in them if more cores are always better? But it's hard to get there with the consumers. We haven't gotten there because really most consumers stopped seeing a difference in above 2 cores, or 2 cores with 2 hyperthreads in the x86 architecture. And it's because software is actually very hard to make parallel. And you don't get a linear gain from the number of cores. Well, those are not consumer arguments, right? Consumers see 4 better than 2. And they don't even read the benchmarking, which actually show that our dual-core Snapdragons are outperforming most, if not all, of the other quad cores that are out in the marketplace. So I think where we're going to have to get to with consumers is they're going to have to really just sort of let it play out for a little while, and they're going to, I think, use the phones that have the best actual experience rather than still being this what we call speeds and feeds kind of comparison. And because of where we are, I think in the product cycle, we're still trying to understand that vocabulary with the consumer. So we'll see. I mean, I've heard rumors of in China people building 8-core designs, and I just think that may be the thing that we need to sort of say, okay, enough is enough. Now let's focus on experience because that's really what you care about.
All right. Let's talk about Windows 8 and Windows RT and Windows Phone now. Intel is gaining momentum in the mobile industry with their Haswell and, of course, all of their SoC chips on the mobile industry in tablets, essentially. Will Qualcomm be competing on the x86 market or not?
Well, we don't consider that to be the x86 market. We consider that to be the PC market and the Windows market. And yes, we'll be competing there. I mean, we've announced with Samsung and Dell our Snapdragon-based Windows RT devices that will be launching later this year. And we've been working with Microsoft for some time, not only on how to build Windows well on top of Snapdragon, but also thinking with Microsoft about features that really are important. Like if you look at one of the big differences between Windows 7 and Windows 8 is this mode called Connected Standby. It really says, how do I make the device sleep at a very low power, but yet act more like a phone in that your email should still come in the background, so as soon as you open it up or turn it on, your information is right there. Well, that takes a lot of coordination at the operating system level to really think about how to manage the network and all these things. We've worked with Microsoft to help design that into Windows. And because of that, we think our implementation of that is going to be differentiated. So in that PC space, back to your original question, we do expect to compete, and we think it's going to be a fun year in that regard in 2013.
All right, so do you work with Intel then?
Why would we work with Intel?
Because they have the same features and technologies.
Microsoft works with Intel, right? So there's some features in the operating system. I was pointing out that we've helped Microsoft make Windows smarter about mobility and connectivity through our partnership with them. Some of that will benefit everybody that uses Windows. We also think it will benefit us because we understand how to do that very well.
What are Qualcomm's expectations regarding Windows Phone in 2013?
Well, we're not going to call the market one way or the other. We think Windows Phone 8 has actually got a lot of really cool features in it, and we think it's built on top of course, the best mobile platform that there is on top of Snapdragon. I mean, more of a personal comment than a company comment. I think it'll be interesting to watch the relationship between the Windows 8 PC and Windows RT PC and the Windows Phone 8. I think you'll start to see, because of the integration that you can get, you'll start to see a set of consumers consider Windows Phone that hadn't considered it before the new interfaces and so forth on Windows 8. So that, I think, is going to be one of the tipping points for Windows Phone.
Right. Do you play with video games, Rob?
You know, I do, but I'm kind of, first of all, I'm old, let's remember that. And I'm more of a puzzle video game guy than an action. I'm not a very good shooter, so I'm more of Portal and Braid and those kind of games than other ones.
So nerd games then?
Yeah, I'm nerd games, I would say. I'm definitely a nerd.
Do you play on your smartphone?
I do. My smartphone, though, I have to say right now the one I play the most is Draw Something. I don't know if that's playing, but it's something I do with my family and my friends. And I do a lot of crossword puzzles. I finally found a good crossword puzzle game that I like. So.
Right. Can you name 2 devices that will actually break through for the holidays or in early 2013?
That one's hard to do for me. I think I don't like, we Qualcomm don't like to announce the devices instead of our partners because we work with so many. So it's hard for me to talk about what would be a breakthrough device. We believe they'll be based on Snapdragon, though.
Of course. So on the market right now, what smartphone do you own?
I have about 6. So I carry Windows Phone. I carry Android. I of course play with iPhone in order to keep up with the market there. So I have a breadth of devices from manufacturers. I have about 4 Android phones right now.
Oh, great. So what would you tell to our French audience if you had something to say to them?
Well, first, I'd apologize for speaking in English. But, you know, Americans, they only learn one language, so my apologies. Yeah. And the only interesting things I can actually say in French are actually Quebecois, so I don't think that would be good, and it's not something that I would want to be quoted saying. I don't know. I think I don't know if I'd say something specifically to the French audience or not, but I mean, one of the things that I think is really important to think about right now is help us understand as a company what features and what experiences you want to drive. I mean, for example, right now, one of the things that I'm very interested in right now is the Internet of Things and how devices communicate directly to each other, because I think in our society, there's the communicating to the cloud, and then there's interacting with the world around you. I'd love to hear from French consumers what they think are the experiences they'd like to drive. How would they like their phone, for example, to interact with their TV or their light switch or their car in a way that actually becomes meaningful to us as a society rather than just being a nerd thing. So while we're all nerds, we're also all as part of the society, so we have to try to find that balance.
All right, great. So do you consider yourself as a geek?
Of course. Just ask my wife how much old electronics there is at my house. Right?
So well, thank you, Rob. It was a pleasure for this interview,
All right.
and we're looking forward.
All right. It's always good to speak with you. Thanks again for taking the time.
You're most welcome.